Welcome back to another episode of Inquiry, a podcast by Project Tech Conferences where we talk about all things related to tech from school to industry. My name is Annie.
And I'm Daniel, and together we are your co-hosts.
For today's episode, we are so excited and honored to introduce Ania. Ania is a technical senior leader with expertise in driving engineering and data strategy, leadership development, and organizational change. Recently, she has been working as a senior engineering manager at Uber Advanced Technologies Group, Research and Development Engineering, leading teams for the productization of deep learning algorithms for self-driving vehicles. Prior to that, she was a senior director of engineering at FreshBooks, where she led data engineering and infrastructure. A graduate of Queen's University, Ania has been working in software for almost 20 years, first as a software developer, then as a technical leader. Throughout her career, Ania has made contributions to networking, security, and web development, and has helped develop new leaders, grow software development teams, and drive technical and organization change at companies such as Siemens, Blackberry, and FreshBooks. Over the past 5 years, Ania has been involved in the Toronto tech scene to provide opportunities and mentorship to new speakers with the goal of encouraging more women to speak at technical events and conferences. We are so honored to have you here, Ania, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us. Would you be able to start off by telling everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, thanks. I just wanted to start by saying it's a real pleasure to be talking to you today and being part of this podcast. I really appreciate the invitation and I look forward to our conversation. So as you mentioned, I've been in software for 20 years. It's a real passion of mine. I started as a developer, and over time, I got more and more involved in both the management and leadership aspects with the goal of trying to make more impactful change at companies and help lead some of the strategy. So I still keep close roots to software. I try to pick up a new software project every year to keep that beginner's mindset and keep myself fresh. And one of the most wonderful things I think about software is that there's always something new to learn. So you always have an opportunity to keep it expanding your knowledge and being a student of the industry.
That's awesome. And that's honestly such an inspiring mindset and goals that you have. So let's dive a little bit deeper back a couple of years now. So how did you first become interested in technology?
So my background was actually mathematics and physics. That's where I started at Queen's. I was doing a joint arts and science and Bachelor of Education. I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to be a nuclear physicist or high school teacher because I loved talking about math and introducing people to math and science. And I had to take a computer course for my math degree. And I decided I would take it in the summer after my first year just to get it out of the way. And I always tell people it was like this eureka moment where it was like the lights came on. It was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Because it really felt like I was able to take my passion for math and incorporate also, I loved being creative and building things, and it kind of all went together with software. And so at the time I went to the dean and I asked to go into second year. So I didn't really have prerequisites of first year when I went to second year, so it was a bit of a struggle, but I think it was very good learning to always think of yourself, you always have something more to learn and not to think that you're ever done. So I learned that right from the beginning. I need to learn more. So, but that's how I got into it. It was a very, very much, I think, serendipitous, because who knows, I could have taken that computer course at, on my fourth year or something. But I've never regretted it. I've never looked back. And I think if I were to say one thing to people is, it can be easy to think of software, how you see software, what your interactions are with it at the time. So I thought software was writing video games and playing video games, which my little sister was really interested in, but I had no interest in. And so I never considered it as a viable career. And since then I've learned that software is like, it permeates everywhere in our society. So if you want to be a creator and you want to take your passion of whatever it is, there's always a software component to it. So to kind of like open your mind to software is, I guess, the message I would tell people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely one of the things that I love most about being in this field as well, or pursuing a career in this field. So what exactly interested you most about technology and going into software and making that change?
Well, I think I always loved doing kind of math puzzles. So there was definitely like this intrinsic, like, this is so much fun aspect of it. But I think the other thing I really liked is it felt super magical, that just by like you were creating something out of nothing, it felt like. Because I do also stuff like woodworking, whatever, like you start with something and you're molding it. But with software, it feels like you really are just kind of like putting your thoughts down, on the keyboard, and suddenly you have all these behaviors and these amazing things that you can do with it. So, and I've never lost that feeling that it's very, very magical. And that's the part that I think has always kept me going, that you can really create so much with it. It's your choice of how you want to use that, how you want to use that for good, whether you want to use that, for entertainment. It's just so vast in that way. But I still, from this day, I think I'm more interested in kind of like solving the logical puzzles and that aspect of it, more than, I don't get quite as excited when a new iPhone comes up. I'm not as excited about the technology part, which some of my colleagues really came in that way. And I think the thing is that the field is vast enough that it allows people coming from all different interests and backgrounds to be welcomed and to be able to thrive there.
For sure. So you mentioned starting off your university career studying math physics as well as a concurrent with the Bachelor of Education. Now, would you be able to dive a little bit deeper in kind of what program you ended up in?
So I think I'm trying to remember. I was in the concurrent education and science program. I think there was 25 of us at the time that got accepted that were in that particular program. And the vast majority of people were in biology. I remember life sciences. So very, very few were in the physics kind of math aspect of it. And so I ended up getting a science degree, but because at the time, this was like 20 years ago, I don't know the size of the computer science program now, but it was fairly small back then. So the vast majority of our courses were with the applied math and engineering students. So I always like to tell my little sister that I basically have an electrical engineering degree or applied math degree. I have an engineering degree because I took all the courses, right? Because they would just put us together. Actually, I graduated with a Bachelor of Statistics because as I went through my university, I got more and more interested in the statistics aspect of math. And I think part of that is because as you advance in math, it becomes more theoretical. You start working with imaginary numbers, proving theories. There's elements of that I like, but I kind of goes back to me being like, I don't know, a 6-year-old kid who just liked solving math puzzles. And I found I got that a lot more in statistics. So I ended up, I think, graduating after like 3 years or something with a stats degree because I focused all my math on the stats section. Then I think I got the computer science degree. And then I like finishing things. So I still got the Bachelor of Education, even though by then I had done a 16-month internship at a company called Nortel, which used to be a really big company in Canada. And I had already signed a contract that was going to come back full time before I went back to do my Bachelor of Education. But I just felt that it's an opportunity that you don't get once you start in industry and you start working. It's really hard to take a step back. So I kind of wanted to finish it. I felt like it would be a good way of rounding me out, allow me to bring in new skill sets that I think a lot of people in software might not have. So that's, I think, part of the reason I did end up being kind of drawn into doing a lot of coaching and a lot of mentoring and a lot of sharing of knowledge, because that's something that really came from my Bachelor of Education experience.
Wow, that's so impressive. So what impact would you say that your program had on your career?
So it gave me definitely the foundation for it, especially someone like myself who didn't come with any prior knowledge in software. I wasn't in the basement writing little code or anything like that. And for some people, I feel like there's multiple ways to get the knowledge you need. And right now we have the internet, we have so many meetups, there's so many different ways that you can learn to be a software developer. 20 years ago, that was much more limited. And I think also, even now, people like myself, I do really well in a school setting. I love when the material's curated for me. I love having that kind of structure in place. And I think it's because there's so many things to learn. It's nice when someone who knows a little bit more already in the field is able to say, hey, these are some of the important things for you to focus on. And I felt like Queen's did a good job of that, giving kind of like the algorithm background, different foundations in different areas of software. And then I remember in the last year, you got to make choices on some of the courses, right? Which ones you wanted to take. And I remember taking a compiler course thinking like, I'll never need to write a compiler, but it sounds like fun. And I never did need to write a compiler, and it was really fun. So I think sometimes you should just take a course because it sounds interesting to you. But yeah, I would say Queens gave me a really good foundation for a lot of stuff, because software is always changing. Like the languages you're going to use, the tools you're going to use, the things you're going to work on is constantly changing. So you need to always have the mindset of being able to learn new things and not being afraid of going into areas that you don't know about. So I've been in situations at times where, you know, I hire a co-op who knows more about a certain subject than I do. And I think that's fabulous. I think that's something that we should be embracing. It's not someone's age, it's not necessarily the background, it's everyone's bringing pieces of expertise that you can really share. So I think having that foundation of being able to learn, understanding the principles of a lot of things just enables you to continue going into different areas. And for me, I'm someone who loves learning and I love newness, I guess is the best way of saying it. So I don't like getting bored. If I feel like I start knowing a subject really well, it's like, okay, here's the time for me to go in the deep end again somewhere else. So I've done that more than once, of switching where I am so that I'm the newbie again. And I love that feeling of having to learn it again, and the excitement that comes where one day you didn't know something and the next day it's like, you know it now. So I love recreating that as much as possible. So I definitely, I think, seek out opportunities to be a novice in new areas of software, because I don't want to be complacent, and I'm in software to learn and enjoy myself. So I want to take advantage of the fact we can do that in this field.
That's so incredible. So, after graduation, you mentioned having signed an offer already full-time with Nortel. Where did you head?
So I went to Ottawa. We were working on a router, and I worked specifically on network protocols, which I think was a great start for me too. I like I like things. Once again, I like the magic stuff. So this is all behind the scenes, you know, how the internet works. There were elements of security in it. There's the only thing I found kind of difficult with my job was trying to explain it to other people that didn't know software, right? And so it was just like trying to explain how routing works in the internet, or how to explain that sort of thing. So that gave me, I think, a good foundation, because I was working with C language. I don't know if they teach that still in universities now, but I think it's a really good foundational language, because so much of things is in your control. You have to control your own memory. You just control so many things, which is great because I'm a control freak in some ways. But so it puts a lot of responsibility on you to really understand the system. But it's also pretty simplistic on how you follow. It's like very procedural. So I think it gives you a really good foundation to then work with other languages who are more and more sophisticated and do more and more things for you. You have a deeper understanding of why that is. But yeah, so I worked in network protocols for a number of years. Nortel, when I joined, I think I was there for about a year, and that's when kind of like the crash happened and the whole industry just kind of froze suddenly. So I think that was both a traumatic and a really great experience for me, because I think when early in your career you realize there are certain things that are out of your control. In my case was that, you know, no one was hiring. Everybody was like, you know, there was, I don't know, it felt like 1,000 applicants for every job. It made you really work hard and be a good employee and not take your job for granted. And so I think it made me also appreciate a good job versus a bad job, because not all my jobs were ones that I really enjoyed early in my career. And I think now I'm more appreciative of making sure I'm seeking out companies that I enjoy working with, that the culture is really good, that I'm getting the growth I need. And that's something that I would really encourage people. I think there's a lot of pressure for people when they're coming out of university to find their first job, and they're focusing very much on how do they sell themselves to the company. And I think you have to also turn that around, is what is the company going to offer you? And how can you ask the questions to find out, is that the right company for you? Because I think right now we are in a really good situation with hiring and opportunities. And I really encourage people to take full advantage of that and make sure they're getting, you know, really good jobs where they're really learning and thriving and so forth. And then, you know, there are going to be hard times. And at that point, what was that expression? You tighten your belt and you just get through it, right? And I think having that resilience to do that is something important, because it's not always free food at the cafeteria and massage chairs. Sometimes it's a lot of hard hours and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, speaking of some of these struggles, what would you say are some of the biggest struggles that you have faced so far in your career?
Ah, that's a great question. I think I used to feel, and I think it's because I came in kind of through that side channel of going into second year without having the foundation of first year. I think I did feel like I always had so much catching up to do. And I think, especially at the beginning part of my career, I really pushed myself hard, feeling like everyone knows more than I do. And I don't think it was necessarily like imposter syndrome kind of thing. It was more like I worked with a lot of very experienced people who had a lot of experience in a lot of ways. And yeah, so I think the main part was I think I had to get through that and really come to that realization of like, you don't need to know everything. No one expects you to know everything. In fact, it's wonderful not to know everything because there's always opportunity for more learning. So I think it was changing that mindset was absolutely critical for me to really enjoy my job and really enjoy being in software. So I would definitely say that was one element that was very challenging for me initially. I think the other one would also be that sometimes other people have thoughts of what's a good way for your career to progress. And I think you really have to take steps back and think about what do you want to do, because there's a lot of opportunities that I think people feel like they have to take because it's a good opportunity without thinking a lot on, is this the right thing for them? Because any opportunity you say yes to, you are actually saying no to other things. And I think people forget that part. They just are worried about saying no to something. And I think I had that tendency as well at the beginning of just saying yes to everything because I need to learn, I need to do something, I need to build my reputation as a good software developer. And it's an easy path to burnout, not bringing in that balance. So I think for me, one of the hardest things was bringing balance, and because there's always more software to write, there's always another bug to fix, is being able to put in those kind of boundaries to make sure you're having good balance and that you're taking care of yourself as well. And walking away from a problem sometimes when you can't fix it. It's okay. Sometimes you just need to take a break, to go for a walk and come back and do it. So I think that was a challenging thing. And then going back when other people have, I was mentioning other people have thoughts of how they think your career should progress. I was really pushed a lot early in my career to try to go into management and lead people. And that wasn't something I was interested in the time. And I think I'd let myself sometimes be kind of pushed to take on that extra responsibility, even though I really wanted to work and do more software. And it was really, I think at FreshBooks, where there after a couple of years, and I realized, oh, now I'm ready. I want to do more management and leadership. These problems to solve really, really interest me. So I think I had always felt bad that I was kind of pushing back against going deeper into that before, but I realize now that I have every right to have my career go the way I want it to go, right? Maybe someone wants to be a manager by the time they've been working 2 years. Other people want to take 10 years and build software first, right? So there is no one path. And I think for me, there was a challenge to realize, because I think when you're in school, you're so used to check, 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 check. You do things a certain way, right? And so taking a step back and realizing your career is in your control. You decide how you want it to go. So that, I think that was a challenge for me initially, but I think I got it. I think I got it now.
Awesome. So speaking of that transition kind of into management, so you first started off as a software developer. What was the transition like and how did it happen?
So I think initially it was a lot, and this is what I do encourage for people who are interested in it, is you take on more responsibility of projects. So you're not just responsible for your own work being done, but you're kind of coordinating other people's work, you're checking in on them, you're looking to see what dependencies are, what conflicts are. And that's something that you can do without even having that title of, let's say, manager or title of team lead and so forth. And it also gives people an opportunity to try that out and see if they enjoy it, if the time is right for them to want to go further on it. Because I think one of the things that happens when you're going into management, like you are no longer or at least in the vast majority of times, it's very difficult to be the strongest contributor anymore. Usually you're tapped to go into that route because you're a very strong developer, you're leading people and people are looking for you for guidance on things. But once you more officially take over the role, there's a lot of additional things you need to do, and you no longer have time necessarily to put that same 100% focus on writing and shipping software. So you move from being the strongest contributor to probably one of the weaker contributors on the team. And that's a really difficult thing to, for people who like doing well. It's a hard mindset to come through that you're no longer the strongest player on the team, right? And I think that's, I would say, is a really big thing. And the other thing I would say about the transition is you're also not working in software. So your skills are not as, and there's so much changing all the time, your skills are atrophying is the best way of putting it, which is why I usually encourage people to do quite a lot of software development before they go into management, because you're not going to have that chance anymore, really. And it's really good to have a very solid foundation and have a real familiarity with what kind of problems occur, like being able to see the patterns of projects going well, software being well written or not well written, before you're overseeing things and are not in the code on a daily basis anymore, potentially. And you're relying on these signals that you're seeing on whether something's working or not. So I think from a transition perspective, that's something important to think about, is do you have the foundational experience to be able to pick those things up without, you know, being the person reading the code and writing the code every day. Those are things that I think for a lot of people, the other thing that can be very, very difficult is you're, as a manager or as a team lead, if you have people reporting to you, you really do need to be thinking about the health of the whole team and how people interact. So there's a lot of soft skills and personal skills. And I think it's really important to lean into conflict versus to be afraid of it. So I've seen far too many times where a team isn't doing well and there's problems in the team and people aren't getting along, and the manager is just like, oh, I just don't want to have that conversation. I feel so awkward. And people don't want to give feedback to people that's negative. And I think you're really doing a disservice to people, because you have information that you're basically not willing to share with them that can really help their career and that could really help the team. So you need to get out of that mindset. And that can be very difficult for people, having to walk in and give people bad feedback on something, right? I think it's called something different, constructive feedback or whatever. But you're basically telling them something that's going to not make them feel good, right? And you have to really think about why you're telling this. Like, never do it when you're angry, because then you're really just doing it to make yourself feel good. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, that you're actually trying to help their career, you're actually trying to help the team, I think that's a gift you're giving them, and you need to think of it as a gift, and obviously do it with as much care and thoughtfulness as possible, but it's something that you have to lean into versus be afraid of. And there's lots of support you can get from other managers to do it. There's lots of, you know, books and training courses, but it's something that, to be an effective manager, I think you have to not be afraid of conflict.
For sure. Now, what would you say would the biggest difference then from being in a manager position versus being more of a software developer in a team?
So on a software developer on a team, you kind of play two roles. You have your own individual contributor, and you're also trying to help your team go along. But your responsibilities, I think, are fairly clear in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of, in my thought, is there's a lot of freedom in that. You know, there's you get to do the fun things, right? Yes, there's deadlines. Yes, there's bugs. But ultimately, if the product doesn't ship, it's not on your head. It's going to be on your manager's head. When you're a manager, you really have to take yourself out of just the team and how the team is doing, and really looking much more on the interactions of the team, the roadmap of where the team's going. So there's this kind of higher order thinking that you need to be involved in. And you're also, there's just so many random things you have to deal with that as a software developer you never would. Suddenly everything is your problem in a lot of ways, right? So someone's immigration status isn't set up properly and their visa is going to get revoked. That's suddenly your problem. Someone is having trouble at home and they're not being able to do all the hours and because of a new baby, let's say, that's your problem. Like, everything becomes your problem. And that can be overwhelming at times, I think, especially if you think that you have to solve everything and you have to solve it right away. So I would say when you're a software developer, it's very clear what your priorities are and what you need to achieve. And, you know, you get your deadline done, you brush your hands and you go get a drink, kind of thing. You're finished until the next project starts. If you're a manager, there's always things that you have to be doing. And I think it's really important, because no one is now telling you what needs to be done, that you're able to figure out what are the actual high priority, high value things you need to do, and what are the things that are easy things that, you know, that just take up a lot of your time. What are the things you should be delegating? So that there's this whole additional layer you need to be thinking about that when you're a software developer, you don't necessarily get a lot of training on, I think.
Yeah, so in order to kind of get into management, would you say the typical route would be you start off as a software developer and then you gradually move into that role? Or is there any other background that you would need?
I think definitely, and I feel very biased on this. So, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be people who feel differently, but I have found with the software managers that I work with that I have found the most effective, them having a strong technical background is really, really important. For the reasons I mentioned before, is you have to be able to see the signals of good code being written, good projects being done well, and the converse of that as well. Another element that I think that is really important that you might have a very strong technical background, but you haven't necessarily done as much of this because you've only been responsible for your own work, is some focus on project management and really understanding dependencies, understanding what needs to be done in what order, let's say, because you're now dealing with so many more pieces of the pie than when you were just a software developer. So the project management aspect, which is something that just tons of material, is just, you don't need a lot, read a few books, get a bit of a familiarity with some of that stuff. That will go a long way. I think the other part would be communication. You do need to talk often with a lot of other stakeholders. You're talking whether it's gathering requirements for customers. There's a lot of communication of how your team is doing. And potentially you have to talk to the executive team because you need to get more resources and you have to learn how to sell that to them in a way. So there's a lot of these soft skills that I think can be very useful for negotiation, for communication, that's useful. And once again, tons of material out there to do that. And I think the fourth one would be the coaching and mentoring. That's not something that you are always expected to do as a software developer, but a lot of your role is really thinking about how do you help other people in their career? How do you look for the strengths and weaknesses of other people? And how can you provide opportunities for them to be able to improve in those areas? So the foundational technical thing, I think, is the most important thing. But then these are all elements that you kind of add as a supporting structure to be an effective person in management, I think.
Mm-hmm. So more so on the software side, then what would you say would be some of the skills that are required to be successful?
So it will depend on what area you're in. Like, I mean, I've at this point have led teams where I have no background in their area of software. It's not something I would recommend to a junior manager. I think, for instance, if you're a backend developer, you want to start with a backend team. If you're a front-end developer, you want to start with a front-end team because that's where your expertise and your experience is going to really be able to help. But there's no like language I would recommend or a framework that you need to know as a technical thing. I would just say, if you're just going into leadership and management, the easiest path is if you start in an area you already know. So if you're a Java developer, lead a team of Java developers because you're going to be learning so much already as how do you be a manager that you don't want to not understand what the team is talking about and not be able to provide any guidance in that area. That being said, I definitely led a lot of teams that wasn't my area. And it's something I really enjoy. I actually look for that now, but I would not have done that as my first management. And usually that's how you go into management. You're probably one of the strongest people on the team. And you have shown that you're responsible, that you're communicating well, that you're maybe mentoring some of the junior managers. And so people in leadership are always looking for those people that they a beacon, and people notice it, and that's how you kind of get promoted into that role. But I think it's also really important is to be super transparent to your manager, saying that that's an area you're really interested in, so that when opportunities do come up to lead a project or to mentor some co-op or something, that you're given those opportunities so you can hone your skills, and you can also trial it out to see if this is actually something that you enjoy doing. When I started, I would flip back and forth between management and development because I would go into management, and then after a couple of years, I would start missing doing development. So my next job, I'd go back to being just a developer. But then after I work as a developer there, I would start noticing things that I wanted to change from, let's say, team structure, organizational change. And like, I can't help but being opinionated on some of these things. So then I'd suddenly become a manager. And so I flip-flop more than once. And I think that's, once again, your career is your choice of how you want to navigate it. So do what interests you and what's right. And I think it's something I've always enjoyed because it gives you a chance to kind of rebuild your technical skills and in new areas as well when you flip back and forth that way and take a break from all the responsibility of being a manager. Yeah.
Yeah, so speaking of this kind of flip-flopping between the different roles, how easy would you say would it be to kind of switch careers, switch roles within the tech industry?
So it's way easier, I think, than in a lot of industries because of the fact often you're having to learn new technologies and languages and frameworks and so forth in your own role. There is this expectation that people's skills are very transferable and that they can learn new things, which is a great bonus to you if you then want to move into a different role that you don't have all those technologies. If you kind of have a proven record of being able to learn new things and deliver well on them, like a lot of people are willing to take that chance on you. I've certainly hired people who don't have the language that we use, they haven't worked in the space that we're using, but they have a history of going into a company, learning it and doing well. And that to me is much more valuable than someone who, I'm going to pick on Java again, is a Java developer and only does Java and has always done Java. Because like, what if your company is for whatever reason switching out of Java? You need people who can adapt, right? So I think employers are starting to be better at this to try to show that there's the required skills and the vast majority is nice to have, but a lot of people, and I've heard this quote that every single person who's ever talking about things is always bringing it up, so I'll bring it up too, is that women only apply for things where they have 100% of the requirements. And I have no idea if that's actually true, but I think there is elements of that I've seen in many people, that they do feel like unless they have every single thing listed, that they shouldn't apply for something. And I would say is like, as long as you have, a familiarity with a lot of this stuff and you have shown that you can learn a new build system or learn a new thing, it doesn't really matter. And all you need to do is be able to convey that in your resume, in your interview. Companies are always looking for smart, good, hardworking people that want to work on the project and get along with other people. So it's not a checklist of things necessarily. So same if you don't have any management experience, like you've never been a manager and you want to apply for a manager role, I think it's much more important to show that in your previous role, you've mentored more junior developers, you've taken the lead on projects, you've been able to deliver successfully, and you've worked cross-functionally in different, like those elements to me are, you basically have done the role without the title. And I think that's fine. You don't have to have that title to get a new role somewhere else.
For sure, definitely important. So we've spoken a little bit about having the importance of having that, showing that you're adaptable and you're able to adapt to different situations. What would you say would be one of the best ways you could show that on a piece of paper, for example, on a resume?
So let's say you work in a company and you love that company, right? You know, nowadays people switch companies often, and part of the reason they do it, and there's benefit of that, is they have to learn new systems and new technologies when they move that, and that obviously shows that they're dependable. But people who stay in that company also learn this vast amount of company knowledge and the system knowledge, and so that makes them incredibly valuable. So I think you could kind of take both aspects of it, and like if you have a company that you love, stay in that company, but challenge yourself to potentially stretch, right? So if you're a front-end developer, challenge yourself once you're good in that area to maybe go a little bit more on the interface and sometimes do things end-to-end on the smaller projects, let's say. If you're a backend developer, instead of passing it over to the person who does the builds, maybe go fix something in the build. So just kind of lean out of your comfort zone and learn a little bit more there. I think that's a really good way of doing it. Sometimes there's opportunities because there's one-off or emergency work. So let's say you work usually with one team on some product, these SWAT teams come along, put your hand up and say, I want to be part of that. A lot of places have on-call rotations. Those are wonderful ways to learn about the whole system and get out of your comfort zone. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just, you don't have to give up what you have, and you don't have to go, leave a place you love or a team you love, but constantly push yourself to stretch and learn things outside of just your core area. Or some people love to just go really deep. Then I say, really embrace it and go really deep. Like if you love JavaScript, get involved in some of the frameworks and become contributors to the open source of it. Like just whatever you're doing, I just say lean into it. Everything is good what you're going to do. I think the only thing to me, sometimes I feel like some people, they put themselves in a little box, and my whole philosophy is like break down those walls, and whichever direction you go, I don't really care. Just challenge yourself and push yourself, and I support that fully. Yeah, and that's what's going to keep you, I think, successful and be able to show to employers that you're someone that they want to hire.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah. So in terms of, we've spoken a little bit about, front end development versus the concept of back end development. How do you find, perhaps like as a student or a new grad, what area that you're more inclined to work in?
Oh, so I think it's going to be so unique to you. So yes, you can talk to other people and so forth, but my biggest thing was like really explore. This is, I find, especially universities who have co-ops and internship, this is such a fabulous time to actually, without making a commitment, learn and have that real experience. And so I think if you're in a school that has lots of co-ops, I would say do different things on your co-ops. Do backend, do frontend, do DevOps, do machine learning, like really try to do that the first couple. And then it's not until about maybe your fourth year where you're starting to think about, well, what company do I actually want to end up with? Maybe try to have your last co-op be a little bit more aligned to that. But having that, I don't know, smattering of things, I think will go a long way to make you understand what things you're interested in. Like I'm terrible at front end. I have absolutely no eye for it, but I love backend, right? And so if I had gone into a front end role and persisted in the front end role, like CSS is not my forte, let's say, right? That I think if you go into a job, let's say, and you say you're me, you're not good, you have no eye, you don't see the difference between red and purple or whatever, like you're just very unaware, then think about what are the elements of what you're doing that you do enjoy. I probably really would like the adapter part where I'm working with the back end from the front end. So I'm still doing front end code, right? Or maybe I'm working on the controllers or like there's elements. And so take a moment to actually think about what are the things you do like and try to bring in a little bit more of that. But sometimes you don't like something simply because you don't know enough about it. And it's hard not being, especially if you've gotten from being an expert to being not being an expert. So also, I think there's just a lot of kind of checking in and self-awareness that you need to do to see what are the elements that you like or don't like about something. And other elements could be like the company just might be wrong for you, the culture or how they work. It doesn't mean that that type of software is wrong with you. So take advantage of the time you have in university to really explore with your summer jobs and your co-ops, and also the projects and the courses that you take. And same in the early parts of your career. Don't wedge yourself into a box, like really explore.
Mhm. So we touched on these co-op opportunities. Do you have any pieces of advice for students who are looking to go into university? Like how do you pick a good program for you?
Looking at the curriculum is good to see, because every university is going to have a different kind of focus area, right? There's also, I think Queen's still has a 16-month internship versus some companies that have multiple co-ops. So thinking about your own financial situation on whether you need like constant influx of cash every few quarters. So there's all these factors that I think sometimes are even outside of the program itself. And then I think any university is going to give you a good foundation. So I wouldn't be as worried. Are you going to, I don't know, Toronto versus Queens? They're all going to be good. Maybe I shouldn't say that at a Queens podcast, but they're all going to be good, right? So think about what is the environment that you're going to thrive more at. Do you like really big places? Does that excite you? Would you rather have a smaller school where your professor might know your name in first year because there's only 50 people in the class versus 300? Like those are all things that are going to make the experience better for you or not better. And think about that aspect as well as just, is this a good university? Because for the most part, we have great universities in Canada. So I think you're going to be fine wherever you go.
And moving on in that process, then in terms of looking for co-ops, do you have any advice for students who are trying to find their first position?
Right now it's been harder with COVID, but usually there are conferences you can go to. There's lots of places. The secret here is that companies really want to hire co-ops. So you do have an advantage. For instance, every company I worked on has been really committed. I used to run the co-op program at FreshBooks. We really expanded it. And there's reasons for that. Co-ops are a great way to provide to our senior engineers mentoring opportunities and give them some of that experience they might need to become managers. So they're a great training ground for that. We love the influx of energy. New people are coming in with new ideas, right? And then they're also a really great way for us to tap in the next generation of developers. So it's a very low cost way for us to test people out to see whether we would ultimately want to bring them in as full-time. So the thing here is we really want co-ops. Companies really want co-ops, right? So think about what do you want as well? And what is that company going to be offering you? Are you going to be put in a corner working on some other project with another co-op? I'm biased here. I don't think you're going to get as much experience than if they embed you in a team and you're working with software engineers, because you're going to learn more from a experienced software engineer than your peer who's in the same program as you, right? So think about those types of things. And that could be more important on whether you're writing financial software or self-driving car software or whatever, is what's that opportunity for you to grow and learn new skills. So ask about what did previous co-ops do, ask about the typical projects they work on. Is it kind of like a standalone project that, you do a demo at the end of the year, or by the first day, are you already shipping code to production? Because I think what you're doing also when you're doing these co-ops and internships is you're testing out not just the company, but the type of software you're writing and the whole industry, right? So you want to have as much as possible a similar experience as you would as a full-timer. So that's where I usually encourage people to lean to, is like, how do you find a company that's giving you that experience? So then you're really able to, test it out to see if this is for you.
Mhm. So as a high school student, then do you know of any programs or any co-op opportunities, or what are some things that high school students in particular can strive to pursue from an early age to kind of have that opportunity to test things out?
Yeah, so I think this is where the size of the company will really come into play. And the reason for that is any student you bring on board, whether they're high school or they're like fourth year, if you're providing them a good co-op experience, you're not going to just hand them a whole bunch of requirements and say, go do it, right? So there's that element where you need to support them, you need someone working with them, and so forth. So I would say smaller companies usually are not as well equipped to take on more junior people. They just don't have enough people to do that. And they have their usually junior full-time people they're still mentoring as well. So I think I would probably look at more bigger companies to see if they have more summer student opportunities there. The other thing I think is really important is like, create your own opportunities. That's the thing that's so magical about software too, is like, you don't need almost anything to be able to write a software program, right? You have free resources, as long as you have a laptop probably, or a Raspberry Pi or something. You do need something, but other than some bare requirements, you pretty much can do it. So if you're in high school and you haven't gotten some summer job somewhere, then I would say look at open source code and try to add code to that, provide comments and so forth. You're going to have incredibly knowledgeable people that are going to be commenting on your code. Embrace that. Like, I think sometimes people are afraid of putting things up in case the code's not good. No, that's great. That's where you're learning, right? So instead of kind of trying to hide the fact that you don't know something, try to find a place where you're interested in the, let's say, open source project, and you contribute to it and learn from the comments you're getting from more experienced developers. Now, if those people are being like assholes to you or something, get out of that project, go to another one. There are always another place you can go, and be choosy in where you go, where you're putting your own time and effort into it, right? Don't accept assholes is my mantra, right? They need you more than you need them. So I'd say open source projects are one. Creating your own project with friends and putting it in GitHub and seeing if you get traction with that. Like, find a problem you want to solve and just solve it and learn from that, and try to run it as much as possible as a real project. Start small and then start adding stuff to it. And this is how people have done amazing things and built companies. And the biggest thing is then not putting barriers to themselves. So I would say those are things. The other thing I would say is reach out to people and talk to them. I've been and sometimes surprised how few people actually reach out. For instance, I go to conferences, I talk at things, and I always say to people, hey, send me a message on LinkedIn, connect with me, love to chat. And, sometimes I'm surprised how few people do that. Sometimes I'm at a conference and it's like every single person has done it. They've somehow gotten the message. But there's so many people in software that are happy to share their knowledge and happy to mentor you, that take advantage of that, right? I think that's another thing that I love about the industry is people, you never will know everything. So you're very dependent on sharing knowledge. So in most cases, there's very much that culture that people want to teach other people and share the knowledge. And they're going to teach you, and later you're going to be teaching someone else. So there's a very much a pay it forward kind of mentality. So those are just some of the things I would say. And there are summer jobs, I think, for students. Like, be okay that your software is bad sometimes. And even good developers write bad code sometimes. And be willing to recognize it and learn from it. I think the biggest thing that will hold people back that I've seen is people who are very defensive about their software, that try to justify why they've done it a certain way where it's clearly wrong when someone else mentioned it. And that actually is like a killer bad attitude. And that will hold you back in your career, it'll hold you back on opportunities. Because the other thing about software is that for all that it's vast, people really do know each other, and people refer to people who are good to work with. So be a good person to work with, and that will take you 90% there. Be a responsible, good person to work with that's learning all the time and taking good feedback back, and you're going to have a very successful career.
For sure. So what is one of the biggest pieces of advice that you'd give to your younger self?
Oh, this is actually advice my little sister gave me. I have actually also an older sister who's also great. It just happens my younger sister has sometimes given me really good advice. I had been given some information, asked to do something, and I was absolutely stuck. I was stuck to the extent where I couldn't even figure out what the next step should be. I was just so stuck. And I'm like, I'm a senior developer. This is crazy. I'm like, they're going to fire me. I'm only in my first month. Like this, And I think I called her and just like, oh my God, I'm just going to get fired. I can't do this job. And she said, okay, well, if you're going to get fired, how long do you think it's going to take? Are they going to fire you today? And I'm like, well, no, it'll probably take like a week or two. HR needs to get involved. And, and she's like, okay, so you have what, 2 weeks? I said, I probably have 2 weeks before I'm fired. And she's like, okay, so what are you going to do in that 2 weeks? And I was like, well, I guess I'll go talk to my manager and find out why can't I get this done? Like, it's 2 weeks, I can still learn something. They're going to fire me anyway. So there's no point in pretending I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to look like an idiot, ask questions and find out. She's like, okay, good. You have a plan. And so like, we both knew I was going to get fired. It was clear, right? So I went back and I went to my manager and said, hey, I'm really struggling with this. I can't figure out the next step. And he was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I forgot to tell you. And he gave me this critical piece of information that made the task impossible otherwise. And I fixed it in like half an hour. Like, it was as easy as that, right? And the reason this was such a kind of like transformative moment in my life is I really have this attitude now of like, expect every day to be fired. And what are you going to do in the time you have remaining? And so it just has freed me so much to never worry about, am I asking a stupid question? Are people going to think that I don't know what I'm doing? Now I'm just like, if I don't know something, I'm going to ask. If I need information from someone, I'm going to ask. If I need something, how do I take full advantage of the time I have remaining in this company and make the most of it? And it's really changed how I approach problems, what I kind of push for, and it's been transformative. And now there's that song, I can do anything, because I'm not holding myself back anymore. And it was just these words, and it's a funny story for them to have had this effect, but that's kind of like my advice that I wish I had known like early in my career, because I think far too often I worked late in the night trying to fix something where I didn't have the right information. I was missing critical stuff, but I never wanted to look like someone who couldn't get it done. So I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And especially when you're a co-op, especially when you're like a summer student, when you're a junior engineer, the most important thing you can do is ask questions and learn. So do not hold yourself back and offer your opinion. There's value in your opinion. And sometimes it's the person who has the least amount of experience sees the obvious thing. So that's something I've always really tried to encourage our co-ops is I want every co-op to be commenting on other people's code. Don't think just because you're new, you don't ask questions why they're doing it a certain way. If it's not clear, maybe the code is actually too complicated, right? So yeah. I don't know if you can sum that up of what the actual advice is, but I think it's like live every day as if it was your last one in your job. And what are you going to do to learn in that time period and to do something?
I love that. And I think that mindset is so life-changing. Yeah. So you've touched upon like kind of this concept of junior developer versus senior developer. What's the main difference and how do you kind of transition from one to another?
I actually ask people that in interview questions to try to gauge their experience level. Yeah. So I think the big thing, my expectations of a senior developer are very much where I give them a problem to solve. And often I don't even give them the problem. They realize there's that problem and they go out and solve it. So there's a huge amount of awareness and willingness to take on that responsibility on themselves. Versus a junior developer, I think it really is much more, you're there much more to learn. And I think the tasks that you're given, they are much more sandbox. It's like, you need to be given the tasks that we already know the answer to, you just now need to do it, right? So it's much more of a structured approach of known problems. So you're working in a structured known problem, while senior developers would be working very often in unstructured, unknown, chaotic problems. I think that's the biggest thing. And then there's also that sense of, instead of thinking, I think in a junior developer, you're often thinking about what's your piece and getting that done. In a senior developer, you're thinking much further on it, is like, how do I get it from all the way to production to the customers and things. So there's this end-to-end kind of mentality of like, you're really taking that responsibility and running with it, which I wouldn't necessarily have that expectation of a junior developer, because often they wouldn't be aware of some of the other, whether it's teams or departments that are necessary to be involved in those kinds of things. Yeah. This was at FreshBooks. I made career paths I spent like so long, all the differences in junior, intermediate, senior, and all the requirements you need to move from one to another. So I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this.
So moving into perhaps more of your day-to-day life as a senior leader, what are your responsibilities and what does your day look like?
Yeah, as the more senior you become, the more future thinking you're working on. So I would contrast that. For instance, if you think about FreshBooks, I worked there, I think about 6 years. I worked there from team lead to manager, senior manager, directors to senior director. So I've had and actually I was a software developer too. So I had like multiple different roles on it. I think the biggest thing I would say is every time I've kind of moved up a level, my horizon also shifts. So as a team lead, I might be really focused on what's the next 2 weeks of work for my team. As a manager, I'm probably thinking, what's the next quarter's worth of work? As a senior manager, I'm looking at the next year. As a senior director, I was looking at, okay, how do we set up our infrastructure? What are the projects we need to do for us to be successful, 3 years from now? And so a lot of the stuff I'm looking at is not the day-to-day operational things anymore. It's okay, I know we're going to need to do this replatforming. That's going to require investment and that's going to require resourcing. How do I build the budgets for that? How do I talk to the vendors and get buy-in for this? How do I get them to like drop the price because I've negotiated so well? So you're working on things that aren't going to become reality today usually, but much more in the future. Not to say that you don't get pulled into the day-to-day stuff, but for the most part, that's the stuff that you delegate to your managers and your team leads and so forth. So the stuff that you would work on a more senior level is you're looking a lot more about the strategy of where you're going. So for instance, my last role at FreshBooks was a senior director of engineering, and I had moved into data. And I was really looking at our data engineering, our data infrastructure. And so part of what my responsibility was when I took on that role was looking, how do we use data? How do we want to become a data-driven company? So it really spans outside of just my core responsibility, but more as a whole company-wide of how do I influence and have us pivot, and how do I set up the right environment? How do I provide the right information for executive buy-in on these things, get the right budget, because that's a lot of money sometimes for the projects that you want to do and so forth. So I really enjoy working on that level because you have such a huge amount of impact on the direction the company is going and what can actually be achieved. Even though you're no longer the person pushing the code. Like I think the furthest, I'm not sure if I even read a line of code in our data engineering, though I knew how to draw the diagrams of our architecture quite well because I had to often have those discussions. But I worked very closely with the data engineering team, for example, to understand what were the challenges of why we couldn't ship software faster. Why did we have pipelines breaking? Why did it take months sometimes for stakeholders to get their projects done? And so you're really trying to take a huge amount of information on these things and make very, at times, big changes and not be afraid of making those changes because it's on you. No one else is going to make those changes to say like, oh, we actually need to re-platform, or we need to spend 8 months re-architecting something, or, it's good. You can't go from a junior developer to a senior director because it's like, I use a lot of analogies when I talk to execs about building a house. If you're starting, you're not going to, walk out of school and probably build an enormous house or a development of houses. You're probably going to start, you're going to, when you're a student, you build a little shed, then you may, work with someone on a model house. And it's the same kind of stuff so by the time you get to a senior director, you're looking at where will be our next development of houses, so like you're talking about long horizons on these types of things a lot of the time. And you're working with large amounts of investment and so forth.
Incredible. So, do you have any general advice to students who are looking to pursue a career in the technology industry?
So I think I touched upon it before as well, is there's so many different facets of technology. Allow yourself to search, allow yourself to kind of like ask for more, to find something that you really want. Ask questions, reach out to people. That's, I think, a really big, having that kind of mindset. And also constantly challenging yourself and constantly learning is, I think, a really exciting part of software, but it's also a really critical part of working in software because things will be changing so much. And I think the other one is, because there's no prescribed path, really think about what it is that you want to do. I think people will think that like, oh, I can't do this. I can't be a manager, then go back to being a developer, or I can't do, and I really think there's no can't. I mean, you can do anything in software. There's so much opportunity. The field is so vast. The need is so high for good people that you have a lot of power actually on making your career what you want it to be. So I think self-reflection, that's something I would work a lot with people who reported to me, is really do those self-reflections on what are the areas you want to learn more about, where are the areas you want to improve, what are the things that you enjoy about your job or don't enjoy. And some things are not even related to technology. Like, do you thrive in a fast-paced environment? Do you find that exciting, or do you find that incredibly stressful? There's enough jobs in enough areas that you can do what makes you happy. So I think my message is don't settle and ask for more.
Got it. Yeah. To kind of conclude the segment, on the note of reaching out and talking to people, do you have any advice for students who are looking for mentors? How is the best way, in your opinion, to kind of reach out to someone and approach them?
I think it's being clear what you're actually looking for, because I mean, I've had people reach out to me and say, can you be my mentor? And I was like, well, what does that entail? What do you want me to do? Like, I don't have 30 hours to work with 30 people for this unknown thing, right? So being very direct of what your ask is. And I think also starting off by saying, can you be my mentor? That's a big responsibility you're asking of somebody. I would tone it down, and like with everything else, is ask for something small. Can I have half an hour to talk to you about something? That's something that most people can fit into their schedule, right? You need to also find out, don't make this like, just like every person, you're going to have an easier time talking to one person than another, right? So find the fit that works for you also. And so be direct in what you want, be clear. And I would say start with small things versus big things, right?
So last question to end off our talk today here. What would you say is the most rewarding part of your job?
I don't know. I think there's more than one. There's more than one. I talked about earlier about you have to lean into conflict. You have to lean into giving people information they don't want to hear. I think some of my most rewarding moments have been where there's been people who were really struggling in their job, and whether this was for personality reasons, for technical reasons, and instead of ignoring it and having them and everyone else suffer, or just laying them off or whatever, is I would have those really hard conversations to try to pull the curtain over and let them see how other people see them. And people who have taken that information, who have worked with that information and have changed and adapted, and then became incredibly high performing, valuable people in the organization, that's something that has been always incredibly rewarding to me, because it is such a difficult thing to do. For me, I never have gotten, and I think the moment you think it's easy to give people bad feedback is the moment I think you should stop being a manager, by the way, right? I'm like, oh God, this is gonna be so horrible. Okay, you can do it, Ania, you can do it, right? So that's something I find incredibly rewarding. I also love the fact that you can have so much impact and build such amazing things. I think that whole magical aspect has still never left me, that I might not be the person on the ground now with the hammer and the nails, but I'm involved in what it is that we're building and the importance of what we're building. And I believe in that. And that's something that always day to day keeps me going. Yeah, so I think it's kind of like those two things, that people thing, that you can actually really change people's careers, and you can also change the impact a company has, and the things that they're providing to their customers. I love both aspects of those things. And then for me also, that I'm always learning something new, and I love that too. That perpetual student, but this time I'm getting paid for it instead of paid for it, right?
Yeah, that's wonderful. And that concludes all of our prepared questions today. Thank you once again so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and chat. We're so grateful to have you here.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Annie. Thank you so much for doing this sort of thing. I think that's one thing I wish I had earlier on. I might have gotten into software earlier, actually, if I had known all the opportunities that were there. So I think it's great that you're talking to people in industry and trying to shed a light on what things look like once you get through those front doors.
Thanks so much for tuning in and having us be a part of your journey to code your future.
Make sure to follow us on our social media to stay in the loop and for a chance to have your questions answered in our next episode. See you then.